Hello friends, today we're going to read The Honeymakers by Gail Gibbons. So this is the third book you will hear that was written and illustrated by Gail Gibbons. What do you notice? What does it show about who makes honey and how they do it? So let's look at the back cover. It says, "How sweet it is. Thousands of bees visited more than 1 million flowers to gather the nectar that went into that 1-pound jar of honey. Here's the buzz on how these remarkable insects work together to create this amazing food." So get ready to read about honeymakers, both honeybees and beekeepers. As you listen, remember to think about the special way that Gail Gibbons writes and illustrates her books. It is springtime. 2 beekeepers have placed a beehive on a hill. Activity begins around the hive. The honeybees and the beekeepers are... Look at the illustrations. What do you notice about the beekeepers? What do you notice about the hive? Okay? The honeybees and the beekeepers are the honeymakers. So look carefully at the illustration that Gail Gibbons has used here. It gives you clues about what you are going to learn. So what do you notice? Honeybee. Honeybees travel to and from the hive. Their earliest ancestors lived about 80 million years ago. The scientific name for honeybee comes from the Latin words Apis mellifera, meaning honey bearer. Honeybees are social creatures. They form highly structured groups called colonies. In a colony, as many as 50,000 or more bees live together and work at their own special jobs. So this is a colony. A colony is a group of animals that live and work together. So a colony is like our classroom or a town or city. We'll find out that bees have different jobs. Many honeybees like to make their homes in dark, enclosed places. Often a colony of wild honeybees builds its hive in a hollow tree. Honeybees cared for by today's beekeepers live in box-shaped wooden hives. So this is a wild honeybee hive, and this is a wooden beehive. Inside the beehive, the honeybees are building an amazing structure called a honeycomb. It is made up of countless 6-sided cells, like a hexagon. Stored in many of these wax cells is the food that bees and people love to eat, honey. So this is the cell. See how it's 6-sided? And the honey is inside the cell. And then the whole thing is called a honeycomb. 3 different kinds of honeybees live inside all beehives. There is 1 queen, about 100 male drones, and thousands of female worker bees. Like all insects, bees have 3 body parts. There is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Honeybees have other parts too. So let's start over here. You see your worker bee, your drone bee, and your queen bee. So the long hollow tongue, the proboscis, sucks up sweet juices called nectar from flowers to make honey. What other animals have proboscis? Think about a butterfly or a moth. 2 big compound eyes are made up of many eye lenses joined together. That's the head. The 2 antennae or feelers are used for touch and smell. 3 simple eyes are believed to be sensitive to light. So bees actually have 5 eyes. Isn't that crazy? You see the thorax, the large wing or forewing, and the small wing or hind wing, the abdomen, and the stingers used for protection. Only the females have stingers. The queen is the largest of the honeybees. She can live the longest, from 3 to 5 years. All the other bees in the colony live for about 2 months, except over winter, when they live a few months longer. It is the queen's job to make sure the hive never runs out of bees. To do this, she leaves the hive to mate with her drones. Then she lays as many as 2,000 eggs a day. Drones are usually smaller than the queen. Their only job is to mate with her. So that's the drone bee, and that's the queen bee. So there are 3 kinds of honeybees that Gail Gibbons describes here. What did you learn about the 3 kinds? We have our drone bee, our queen bee, and our worker bee. Most cells in the beehive are used for storing honey, but some are used for the queen to lay her eggs. These are called brood cells. In each brood cell, a bee will develop and grow. The largest brood cells are queen brood cells, also called royal cells. Drone brood cells are smaller. Even smaller are the worker brood cells. The eggs in those cells will become worker bees. Although all the worker bees are females, they do not lay eggs. Instead, they do the work of the beehive. So that's a drone brood cell. You see the worker bees, and there's a worker brood cell, and then the queen brood cell or royal cell is here. So you see how it's bigger? Most eggs the queen lays are no bigger than the period at the end of this sentence. After 3 days, a larva hatches from each one. For the next 3 days, worker bees called nurse bees feed the larvae bee milk. Then they feed it bee bread. A queen larva is fed royal jelly throughout its growth. So here you see the larva, it's super tiny, and you see the worker bee called a nurse bee that's taking care of the larva. So bee milk is a milky syrup that is full of nutrition. It is made by glands inside the nurse worker bee. Bee bread is a combination of pollen and honey. And royal jelly is made the same way as bee milk, but it is more nutritious, and it's only given to the queen larva. Each larva grows quickly, then spins a silky cocoon around itself. Inside the cocoon, a pupa develops. A nurse bee seals the cell with wax. Okay, see the cocoon? Little by little, the pupa changes. It begins to look more like an adult insect. This process is called metamorphosis. Queens develop in about 16 days from the time the eggs are laid. The metamorphosis of drones and workers takes about 21 to 24 days. Finally, after the transformation is complete, an adult bee chews its way out of the brood cell, an adult honeybee. So do you see how it's changing from this into something that looks more like an insect? You see how it's metamorphosis, it's changing, and then it changes into an adult honeybee. This honeybee is a worker bee. From the minute she comes out of her brood cell, she is as busy as a bee. For the next 3 weeks, she will have a number of different jobs to do inside the hive. First, she is a house bee, cleaning and polishing the cells. About 3 days later, she becomes a nurse bee. So you see a house bee and how it's cleaning the cells, and then you see the nurse bee and it's feeding the pupas, or the larva. After days of being a nurse bee, she becomes a wax-making bee. She makes flakes of wax in her abdomen and chews them to mold new cells or repair old ones. Wax-making bees are also in charge of storing the nectar and pollen that other honeybees bring back to the hive. Other workers care for the queen. They are her court. They cluster around the queen to continually feed and groom her. So this is a wax-making bee. And then this is the court. So that's a queen bee, and these are all the worker bees that care for her. So honeybees have many different jobs. Look at the illustrations. And notice what the worker bee is doing. What do you wonder about the jobs of the worker bees? About a week later, the wax-making bee becomes a guard bee and begins its outdoor life. Guard bees protect the hive. They chase away intruders with their stingers. They also alert the other bees by spreading a special scent when there is danger. A guard bee will sometimes die in battle to protect the hive and its honey. So you see the stinger, and there's a guard bee. And what do you think it's guarding the hive from? The worker bee is now about 3 weeks old. She is ready to become a forager bee, her last job, but a very important one. Forager bees are the bees you see zipping from flower to flower. They collect sweet juices called nectar from the flowers for honey making. So the bees that you see buzzing around the flowers are called forager bees. So cool. At each flower, the forager bee collects nectar with her proboscis. She stores the nectar in a special part of her body called the crop or honey stomach. This stomach is separate from her other stomach. As she grows from flower to flower, she comes in contact with a yellow powder called pollen. Some of the pollen is collected in little baskets formed by the special hairs on her hind legs. So up here you see the crop or honey stomach. And then you see the proboscis, which is a little spout that comes out of the insect's face and into the flower, and then you see the pollen basket. So when you see bees flying around, make sure you look out for the pollen on their legs, because that's called a pollen basket. As a forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from flower to flower. This is a part of the process called pollination. When she has visited many flowers and her crop is full, she beelines back to her hive. Pollination is the movement of pollen from stamen to the stigma of the same kind of plant. This makes seeds to grow new plants. Pollination is extremely important for plants to grow. So what is happening here? What does the bee do once it has filled its stomach? It beelines back. So beeline means to travel quickly in a straight line from one place to another. Back inside the hive, the forager bee brings up or regurgitates the nectar. Then she transfers it by tongue to a hive bee. The nectar is passed by tongue among the hive bees until some of its moisture is gone. Then a wax-making bee places the nectar in a honey cell. There it continues to dry. So that's a honey cell. The nectar can be up to 80% water when it is first brought to the hive. Forager bee, hive bee. And you see how they're passing it back and forth through the proboscis. And then the wax-making bee is putting it in the cells. More and more nectar is added to the honey cell. House bees cluster over the cell and fan their wings to evaporate even more of the moisture in the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and thicker. Finally, the wax-making bees cap or seal the cell with wax. Slowly, the nectar ripens into honey. So honey is about 18% water. So what new information has Gail Gibbons shared with you about how honeybees make honey? So, dances of the honeybees. When forager bees return to their hive, they have a special way of telling the other forager bees of important discoveries, like a new location of flowers full of nectar and pollen. They do the dances of the bees. So the circle dance. The forager honeybee circles in one direction, turns around and circles back the other way. This dance tells the other forager bees to look for new flowers anywhere within 300 feet of their hive. The wagtail dance. This dance tells the other forager bees that the flowers are farther than 300 feet away. The direction she dances while wagging her tail tells where the flowers are in relation to the sun. The number of wags per 15 seconds tells how far away the flowers are. A forager honeybee can visit up to 10,000 flowers a day. All the nectar she collects in her entire life can make only about 1 teaspoon of honey. To make 1 pound of honey, it takes nectar from over 1 million flowers. Also, different kinds of honey come from different kinds of flowers. Honeybees have always been valued for the honey they make. For thousands of years, people have stolen honey from wild beehives. People became beekeepers when they began to make their own hives. Some used hollow logs, others used clay pots. Later, in about 1500, European beekeepers started using upside-down basket hives called skips. Then, in about 1850, the hanging, movable frame beehive was invented. Excuse me. So this is a wild hive, a hollow log hive, a clay pot hive, a skep, and a hanging movable frame beehive. On top of the hill is a modern beehive. The beehive is stacked in sections, each section hanging about 10 wooden frames where the bees build their honeycombs. To help the bees build their honeycombs faster, the beekeeper places wax foundations in the frames. So the honey super is the section the beekeepers will harvest. The food chamber is where the bees store the honey they need for their food. And the brood chamber is where the queen lays her eggs, which is down here. And then that's the entrance and exit for the bees. A foundation is a sheet of wax impressed on both sides with a pattern of honeybee cells. Do you see how it's the shape? It's time for beekeepers to harvest the honey. The honeybees have had several months to build and fill the honeycombs. The colder the winter, the more food they will need. The beekeepers move slowly around the hive. They wear special clothes and use special equipment to protect themselves from getting stung. So you see it's a helmet with a veil. A metal hive tool is used for prying apart frames stuck together. White coveralls with elastic or ties at the wrists and ankles. White makes the bees feel calm. They're wearing gloves. And the smoker calms the bees. Then they're wearing boots. Back at home in a shed, the beekeepers use a hot knife to cut the wax caps off the honeycomb. Then the honeycomb frame is placed inside an extractor. It spins around at high speed to remove the honey without breaking the honeycomb. The honey goes into a collecting tank. So you have the knife where they're taking off the wax caps, and then that's the extractor and the collecting tank. Next, the honey is filtered through a screen and a cloth to remove small pieces of wax. Then the honey is packed in airtight jars. Sometimes beekeepers melt down old damaged honeycombs to make beeswax candles and other things. The rest of the empty honeycomb frames are returned to the hive for the honeybees to fill again. So you see how it put into jars, and then the other beeswax can be made into other things. And then the honey house, see how the honeycomb is clean again. For some beekeepers, honey making is a hobby. They use the honey themselves or give it away as gifts. Commercial beekeepers provide stores and shops with gleaming jars of their product to sell, delicious sweet honey from the honey makers. So a beekeeper's yearbook. Start with January. It's been really cold. All was safe at the hive after a blowing storm. The bees stay clustered around their queen to stay warm, rotating from the outside to the inside of the cluster, where it is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. February. Still cold. We inspected the hive to see if the bees have enough honey left. All is well. The queen is beginning to lay eggs for the new honey-making season. March. Spring is coming. We uncovered the hive and inspected the bees again. Some days it gets up to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, and a few bees are out looking for nectar. April. Another inspection. The worker bees are becoming more active. We see them hurrying to and from the hive. They're collecting nectar from early spring blossoms. May. Lots of activity at the hive now that many spring flowers are in bloom. The hive must have become too crowded because the old queen left in a swarm with about half the colony. The new queen looks healthy, so we won't have to replace her. June. The bees have been busy as bees. They have been zooming to and from the hive, collecting nectar from early summer flowers. We inspected the bees and added another super. July. We collected honey from the top super, then replaced it. The frames are full of honey. Later we had to stack on another super because the bees are producing so much. August. Activity continues. Some workers are already getting ready for winter. They are patching cracks inside the hive with propolis to keep the cold winter out. We gathered more honey. Fewer eggs are being laid. So the propolis is a glue that bees make from plant resins. September. Activity at the hive is slowing down. The bees are still collecting nectar from fall flowers. We noticed the drone bees were being pushed out of the hive to die. This way the workers and the queen will have more honey for themselves. October. It's quiet around the hive. The food chamber is full of enough honey to get the colony through the winter. November. We went up the hill to wrap the hive to help keep it warm inside. At this time of year, the queen doesn't lay any more eggs. That way the colony won't grow too large for its food supply. December. What a cold winter. We know the bees are keeping warm inside their hive by clustering together. They have lots of honey to live on, up to 40 to 60 pounds per hive. We gave beautiful jars of honey and beeswax candles as gifts for Christmas this year. So here are some facts. Warning, worker bees can give painful stings. When a honeybee stings, tiny hooks called barbs on the stinger keep it from coming out of the victim's skin. The stinger has poison on it. When the bee flies away, the stinger stays behind. The bee dies because its insides are damaged. So bees sting only when they or their hive is in danger. Some people are allergic to bee stings and if stung can become very sick or die. Never approach a hive in the wild or a commercial hive unless you're with beekeepers and you're dressed for protection. If you get stung, tell an adult right away. About 8,000 years ago, Greeks used the honeybee as a design on coins. Individual beekeepers prefer different strains of honeybees. Some common strains are Italians, Germans, Conolians, Caucasians, as well as African honeybees. Swarming happens when the old queen and some of the colony leave to find a new home. When a hive becomes overcrowded or a new queen takes over, the new queen will sting any other queen bee's brood cells. This kills any developing queens, ensuring that she remains the only one. Unlike the stingers of worker bees, the queen stinger does not come out of her body. The cells of a honeycomb tilt slightly upward so the honey won't spill out. On a hot summer day, the worker bees keep the hive cool inside by fanning their wings. There are about 8,000 cells in each honeycomb frame. Apiculture is beekeeping or the study of honeybees. An apiary is a bee yard or a place where colonies of bees are kept. Honeybees pollinate more flowers than any other insect. Some commercial beekeepers provide pollination services for agriculture. Bees make different flavors and shades of honey. That's because they collect nectar from different kinds of flowers. So you can have clover honey or buckwheat honey or many other kinds of honeys. Some colonies can produce 500 pounds of honey a year. Throughout the world, beekeepers harvest about 1 million tons of honey each year. The United States ranks third in the world in honey production. So what do you think about honeybees and beekeepers after hearing this book? How do bees communicate with each other? Today, people keep bees in hives so they can harvest the honey. What do beekeepers do? So let's look at some illustrations. Look at at what some of the people look like. Look at what the people look like, and then look at what the bees look like. Why do you think Gail Gibbons drew it this way? What looks real and what does not look real? Which drawings have more details? Why do you think it was important to Gail Gibbons to draw the bees in a way that made them look real? Why do you think Gail Gibbons calls honeybees and beekeepers the honeymakers?